Good morning, everyone. This is Russell Rucker, and I'm here for another constitutional talk. You know, I love the sound of the Liberty Bell and ringing and having an exact replica. It's nice. Just as, among all the other things that are actually in our studio here, the cannon, the Liberty Hall that's down, the White House, the different bust statues, the globes from 1783, all these things. I understand there's some confusion. This is the British flag. It's not the rebel flag. You know, we have to understand our history a little bit. Now, I want to bring up a quote today, a quote by John Adams, our second president. And he says, "I must study politics and war, that my sons may have liberty to study mathematics and philosophy." Now, our founders, much of them actually knew a lot about philosophy, you know, because they studied ancient Rome and Greece and all these things, all these historical events that occurred through the centuries. And they were able to draw on them in studying studying for outlines to the Constitution. Alexander Hamilton, for instance, whispering in Franklin's ear. You have Pinckney with the outstretched hand over there. And, there were different people engaged in different ideas in the convention. But what I want to talk about today is politics. You know, I don't want to discuss politics that much because the conservatives will run to their side and the liberals will run to their side, and we will accomplish nothing. You know, George Washington warns us about political party and really about politics. We should be aiming, and our elected leaders should be aiming for the best result regardless of what party comes up with it. That's what we should be engaged in. And having parties vote in blocks as if they're different people, different groups, kind of undermines the whole idea of representative government. See, the idea that the founders had was that no one would achieve too much power, and they divided up power. And that's why you have the separation of powers, so that this wouldn't occur. But we've gone full circle, and they're acting as if they're all one in Congress and the White House and the judiciary branch and all this are all acting as if they belong to a specific party, and thereby voting as one. So instead of having 435 representatives, we're down to 2. Because everybody's either on one side or the other. Now, I don't deny there are free thinkers that float back and forth and have their own ideas, and that's how they should all act. Politics can be a problem. And we should be working towards what's best for the people of our country, not what's best for party. And I think Washington said it best in his farewell address when he said people will devote themselves to party and undermine the principles of the republic and the patriotism. Love for party will replace the love of patriotism. And that's a real risk we have at hand. And as we approach Thanksgiving and we talk about what we're thankful for, one of the big things I'm thankful for is the liberty we have in our country, the freedoms we have. And there is a difference between liberty and freedom. Freedom is a personal kind of liberty. Liberty is freedom from other nations. You know, the right to govern ourselves. But when we talk about politics and party, what we wind up with is everybody fighting against each other, and we aren't resolving any problems that we have. And we have plenty of problems. It doesn't matter whether it's 1850, 1950, 1780, or today. We're always going to have problems that have to be resolved. We're a nation of laws. And there's a difference between lawmakers, the executive, which would be our president, and the judicial branch. And it's divided up for a reason. Lawmakers are going to engage in making law. They're going to try to set up rules to govern ourselves. And the president will have to sign on to these things and execute. In other words, being the executive, he's going to have to execute the laws of the land fairly. Carry out the directives of Congress. That's his role. He really has a couple of roles. One is that of defense, defending the nation, and the other is that of an administrator of the laws that Congress passes. He also has foreign policy, writing treaties, deciding tariffs, appointing judges and administrators within his own cabinet. And so there is that. The judiciary is supposed to only decide law. That's the purpose of having a Supreme Court and inferior courts, as is described in the Constitution, meaning the lower level federal courts, your district judges, your federal judges, and your all your district courts, your appeals courts, and then the Supreme Court. Those inferior courts are mentioned in the Constitution. There are people today that want to ignore those, and somehow they think that there's something wrong with the lower courts. But it's spelled out in the Constitution for the inferior courts, and that's what they mean by inferior courts. They're inferior to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is the law of the land, or they tell us what the law of the land is. Federal law is the law of the land because there's a supremacy clause in the Constitution. All these things make a difference. When I look at the Constitution, and I'm a little different than most people. Most people are looking at the Bill of Rights. They're looking at the amendments that are passed. And my feeling is the most important part of the Constitution is the original section, your division of powers. The states not being allowed to coin money other than gold or silver. The right of the House and Senate to have their own rules. All these things become important because it sets up the basic framework of our government. I don't deny that there are important things in the amendments, freedom of speech, press, the right to practice your religion, the right of the people to keep arms, the rights of the accused, the idea that anything that's not in the Constitution is reserved to the states and the people. All those things in the Bill of Rights are important. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, how to deal with the leftover problems from slavery. All those things become important. They really do. But there's nothing more important than the division of power. There's nothing more important than not allowing any one person to gain too much power. Those, my friends, are where the true importance is. And that's where we have the Electoral College and the whole idea of impeachment. All these things matter, and that's why they're in our Constitution, because our founders in the convention thought they were important enough to discuss. Politics is really kind of an evil that we try to sidestep. We try not, our founders didn't want us in huge political battles. They wanted to do what was best of the republic, with each individual senator and House member thinking for themselves, not as a political party or a unit. And I want you to think about that. Think about it in today's context. It seems so removed. But this really is the way it was meant to be, the way it was set up to be. Now think about that for a few minutes. And we'll catch you next time on the next Constitutional Talk. Liberty is important, my friends. And the way we govern ourselves is ultimately the true goal of importance. We'll see you next week. Have a good day. Bye for now.